This is Dan Bolin. I'm the host of this podcast called The Courage to Be Courageous, a place where you can come and hear stories of people from all over the United States who have faced fear and have the courage to get through their fear and be their authentic self. Our podcast also interviews people who are fighting for LGBTQ rights throughout the whole United States and actually the whole world. And we have three really special gifts today. And that's three gentlemen. I'm going to give you their names: Ian Jenkins, Alan Mayfield, and Jeremy Hodges. And so would one of you kind of explain a little bit about the arrangement that you guys have? I know it's called a throuple, but many people, including myself, up until a year ago, I did not know what that was. So let's see. Ian, can you explain that to us?
Sure thing. Marriage is a committed relationship between two people, and a throuple is a committed relationship between three people. And that's
Excellent. Excellent. Very good. And so let's talk a little bit about your history. We'll start with Jeremy first. I know that you were raised, I believe, in a church environment. I believe in Montana, Nazarene. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Tell us a little bit about your history.
I was raised a pastor's son from Montana, and I went to a Christian university. And then right out of university, I started working for the San Diego Zoo out in Hawaii. And it was then that I kind of left the church and started realizing that I was a gay man. And so I dated some people, and I had one serious relationship. And I, like you, had never heard of a throuple until about 6 months before I met Alan and Ian. I met my first throuple. My first thought was like, oh, that sounds crazy. And this throuple was this really dynamic throuple that we are still friends with. And they are, at the time, they were actors on Broadway. So they were young and attractive and really dynamic. And so I had a million questions about what their relationship was like. And by the end of it, I thought, well, it's not really for me, but I see the appeal. And then fast forward to 6 months to a year later, I met Alan and Ian. And, basically right when I met them, we have been inseparable from then on.
Okay, fantastic. I appreciate that. And Alan, tell us a little bit about your history and how you and Ian met. I know you were both in medical school when you met. Give us a little history on that, if you would, Alan.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Colorado. I was raised Catholic in a fairly conservative religious part of the country right outside of Colorado Springs. But my parents were pretty supportive. And I, thought as a teenager, I think I'm gay. Gosh, I hope I'm not. I hope this is a phase that clears up. But it was pretty persistent, and went to college in Colorado. And then I went to medical school in Boston. And I was in medical school, and I met Ian on a rotation. Ian was a medicine resident doing his internal medicine residency in one of the Boston hospitals. And I met him when I was on a rotation in internal medicine. And at first I didn't realize he was gay, and I wasn't sure that we were even compatible. And, but I thought he was very smart, very interesting, really interesting to talk to. And after our rotation ended, after, I don't know, a month or so, something like that, then I reached out to him, and we, started dating shortly thereafter. So we've been together now since 2003. So really just over 20 years. And we've been with Jeremy over 10 years.
Excellent. And so let's just, I want to make a comment on what each of you do right now. I know, Alan, you are a psychiatrist, correct?
Right.
And the San Diego, is it the hospital in San Diego?
I'm a psychiatrist for a local hospital here.
Yes. Okay. And then I know Ian also is a professor of medicine at UC San Diego. Is that correct?
It is.
And then I know Jeremy actually is I guess you would say the head, takes care of all the animals at San Diego Zoo. I don't know what your title is. Give me a little bit.
I'm the lead zookeeper for the veterinary hospital there at the San Diego Zoo.
Excellent. I appreciate that very much. Well, it's really a pleasure to have you guys on my program, my podcast there as well. And we want to know a little bit about, each of you and how you got together and how you were able to form this incredible relationship that you have. But let's talk about the book, which I just started reading it. I think it is fascinating and powerful. 3 Dads and a Baby. Actually, I think now 3 dads and babies, because you have 2 now. Tell us a little bit about your journey on wanting to have children and how that all came about. And we'll have any one of you make a comment. I see Ian pointing at Alan. So Alan, let's take the floor here.
Sure. I've always been interested in having kids, and for a number of years, Ian and I had talked about it, but I wasn't sure. It didn't seem like it was something he was really interested in pursuing very strongly. We were kind of focused on our careers at that point. And we just, people, our peers, our age that were having kids, their kids were getting older. And I thought, I think this ship has sailed 10 years into our relationship. It hasn't happened. I'm approaching 40. I think that's probably not going to happen for me. And didn't think much else of it. And then when Jeremy joined our relationship, I think that really changed the dynamic because he was interested in having kids. We hadn't set any concrete plans in motion because I think part of it was just thinking, we're going to throuple. I'm not even sure how we would do that. That seems pretty complicated logistically. And we were at a party, I think, and Jeremy has a friend, and her sister is a lesbian, a married lesbian, and they had kids through IVF and had 3 beautiful children, and they still had some embryos that were frozen. And she approached us and said, "Hey, would you guys ever consider having kids? I think you'd make great parents." And it's, said she had some frozen embryos that she didn't want to discard. And she was interested in seeing if we would adopt them. So that really was the catalyst for us discussing seriously, is this something that we would do? Because it kind of just fell in our lap. And so Jeremy was gung-ho, Ian was open to it, and I was interested and had some hesitation about us being in a throuple and thinking, is that going to be too much for the kids having 3 parents, 3 dads in this society? And I don't want to burden them, and, really thinking about, how that would work, if we broke up and all these kinds of things. And so after really thinking about it and talking about it and exploring it, I just decided, I think that the kids would be brought into this world with intention and with love, and we're mature enough and have good, we're well resourced, and that we would take all these steps to ensure the kids were protected, even if our relationship fell apart. And I just thought, I can't think of anybody who's putting that much thought into it that in the end of it would do a bad job of it. So that really triggered us to start our journey.
And I want to make a comment on the first chapters I read of the book. Wow, you guys went through an awful lot to have your children. Tell us a little bit about, because I know that having the first egg donor did not work out, and you guys, I see the expense list going up. I see how much you're paying to do that, and it shows the commitment you had for having children, all of you, and you just kept going. Even though it was expensive, it showed the love you had for wanting to have children. Tell us a little bit about the first egg donor and why you had to get a different egg donor. I think you ended up with Megan, if I remember right.
So the first donor was actually an embryo donor. So it was the sister of a good friend of mine. And had it worked out, our kids would have been the full siblings of her 3 children that live here in San Diego. So they had extra embryos. They wanted to donate them. Once we started the process, I think that it became a little bit more difficult for the women to donate their embryos. I think that it's just, letting go of your genetic children is difficult once you actually start it. So it was about a year-long process to actually adopt the embryos. And these embryos had been made several years prior. So we elected to genetically test them. And unfortunately, one of the embryos was not genetically viable. So we were down to one. And we found a surrogate who was a friend of Alan's, and she went through all the injections, and we implanted the embryo, which was rated fair. They're rated on a scale, and this was not an excellent or a good embryo. It was rated fair. And it was just so tragic because it was, we just didn't get pregnant, and it's one blood test. So you've done so many, I mean, we've done a year of momentum and lawyers and legally adopt them and genetically test them and find doctors and all the things. And so it was so difficult when it was one test and then, nope, you're not pregnant, and it didn't take. And you can't help but feel like, oh, can we test again, please? So we took a little bit of time to regroup and decide what we wanted to do. Our surrogate was one of the big factors for us continuing. She just said, when are we going again? Let's do this. You guys are meant to be dads. So what's the plan? So it's at that point that we decided to find an egg donor and make our own embryos and continue our journey.
Excellent. And showed a lot of courage on all of your part. Here you'd spent all this time and money, and you had basically nothing. You had to start all over again. And I believe, isn't that where Megan came into the picture then? Tell us a little bit about her.
Yeah, Megan is a close friend of mine. We've been friends since we were 7. So we grew up together in Colorado, and have been the kinds of friends that no matter where we are in our life, if we see each other a few times a year, it's like we never left, and kind of can pick back up and feel pretty close. And she and I were going to a high school reunion of ours, and I had mentioned that we were what we were doing and trying to have kids, and that it wasn't working, and we were thinking about using an egg donor, like a paid one, essentially from one of these banks, kind of like a catalog type situation.
Mm-hmm.
She had mentioned, that she might be interested in doing that for us, which is great. We had thought about that, but it's a big ask for anybody in our lives to do that, who would have that level of kind of genetic connection to their child, even if they are not the ones carrying the child.
Right.
She was, my age. So at the time, I think we were 30, 38. So not exactly young in the terms of like reproductive years, but we really thought that it was an ideal situation if we could make it happen, where our children, if we were lucky enough to have more than one, would be related genetically through the same egg donor, so they have the same mom. And if they had that person that could be present in their lives, so they knew this is where I came from, this is how I was made, that it would be ideal. So I likened it to sort of like an open adoption situation, where the child knows they're adopted, they know where they came from, they're raised by a set of legal parents, but they're also aware, hey, here's who my mom is, here's where I came from, and there's not like a reveal, there's not mystery. So not that there's anything wrong with those situations, that happens all the time, but I just thought, if we can control it, I think that would be nice for us, and it would be nice for the kids, and it would be nice for them to have sort of a mother figure that can be present in their life, even if we're the primary, legal parents, the primary parents that are raising the children. And she was on board with that. She, I think, similarly thought maybe her ship had sailed, and she wasn't in a long-term relationship. She wasn't in the process of, having kids. So in that situation, I think it was a big decision for her, but I think she ultimately decided, hey, I want to do this for these guys, and it would give me a chance of sort of having kids in a sense as well, on her part.
Excellent. And I believe Megan was the donor for both Piper, which is your daughter, and Parker, which is your son. I believe Jeremy and Megan, Jeremy, you provided the sperm with Megan, and Alan, you and Megan then made Parker.
That's right. Yeah. So the egg retrieval was all done at the same time, and we divided up the number of eggs that we got roughly equally between the three of us, had those fertilized in a lab, and just let the embryos grow. So Piper's embryo grow and was a very strong, rated excellent embryo. And I had 2 embryos grow. One was rated excellent and one was rated fair. And so one of those is Parker. And unfortunately, none of Ian's embryos grew. We did try later another egg retrieval and spend some money to try to do that and give him an additional chance. And unfortunately, none of those embryos grew.
Very good. And they have 2 beautiful kids. I've seen pictures of them. They're beautiful kids. Let's talk a little bit now. Megan, of course, was the egg donor, but you had to have a surrogate to carry the kids. I believe, were they two separate surrogates or just one to carry both the children?
Separate surrogates. Our first was absolutely amazing, and went through so much with us. But like all of us, was kind of at the end of her reproductive years, and it was a lot to ask for her to do. So she really just wanted to have one kid with us. Our second surrogate we found through an agency, and we were worried that would be less of a personal experience, or that we wouldn't be able to find a nice match. But the first person that we met and really seriously considered was fantastic. She was interested in our story. She wanted to help us raise kids a little bit as an element of a mission for her, because she has some LGBTQ family members and understands the challenges that we can face in starting our families. And she also was just absolutely wonderful. And we couldn't have been more happy with the two of them as far as how they took care of our children and their excitement to see them grow since the kids have been born.
Excellent. That's great. Now let's talk about the legal battle and going to court here, because this is obviously something that I've never heard of before, and maybe it's certainly unique. Tell us about you all wanting to be on the birth certificate. You wanted them to all be there. Why was that important to each one of you?
Well, I think the biggest issue is we all are parents. We are parents. We wanted the birth certificate to reflect that fact. But beyond that, there were very, important legal and financial reasons to be parents for the children. And the first is that, as Alan described earlier, we wanted to have these kids with intention and make sure that they were set up for the best possible lives that we could give them. And that meant we wanted to have our obligations to them in writing. So no one could say, oh, I changed my mind. I'm not part of the family. I'm not a legal parent. I'm going to leave. We're all obligated to take care of them. And it was very important for us all to specify that and put our commitments into the law. Another reason is to protect the children. So if I ever needed to take the kids to a pediatrician when Alan and Jeremy were not available, it's harder to do that if you're not a legal parent. Or if we were traveling out of the country, people could raise questions about, whose children are these? We are the parents of these children. And then for financial reasons, like if I were not a legal parent to the kids and I died, my work pension, which is one of the best benefits of working for the University of California, would just disappear because none of us are married. But because I'm the legal parent to these children, they'd be eligible to get that pension until they turned 18, which is a huge difference for the well-being of the.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Very good. Now, let's talk a little bit about, and I thought this was a fascinating story, and about going before the judge, which had to blow her mind because she was wondering, what am I supposed to do on this? Tell us a little bit about what this goes back to Piper. Wasn't so much of an issue so much with Parker, but let's tell us a little bit about the judge and what you wanted her to do, and yet she was having a difficult time with it. Any one of you can share on that.
Yeah, I'll share. So with any IVF and surrogacy situation, gay, straight, otherwise, you need to go to court before the child's born to have a parentage order. So this legally declares that for the purposes of the birth certificate when the child's born, the proper legal parents will be identified, rather than kind of defaulting to the birth surrogate. So that's routine. Normally, depending on the jurisdiction, the legal parents may not even show up. They just are putting it, their lawyers are putting it on behalf of them in front of a judge, and the order gets signed. And in our situation, we were trying something that, as far as we know, hadn't been done before, in terms of the 3 fathers on a birth certificate. And our lawyer had initially said, well, I think you should all show up, but I think it should go through. I think it will be fine. And when we showed up, it was not fine. The judge came out and said, hey, I understand that you all want me to do this. I don't think that I really can do this. I'm reluctant to set some kind of precedent. And I don't think I can do that. I think that the law allows for, and in the law in California, you can actually have more than 2 parents on a birth certificate, something I didn't know about, but it's for special, it's been used for special situations like maybe the mother's incarcerated and the grandmother's raising the child, and it's in the best interest of the child to have, another person be named a parent in addition to the existing parents. So that does exist already in California, but had never quite been used in the way that we were proposing to use it. And so the judge said, I think that I can't show that there's been harms because the child hasn't been named.
Has been born, yeah.
So the child needs to be born and has to have suffered harm and then come back to my court and show me the harms. And then I think that I could consider that and do that, which just really kind of blew our minds of sort of saying like the child has to be harmed before the law, before you could do the thing that in our minds was in the best interest of the child.
Of course,
yeah. We weren't seeking to set precedent and change the law to fit our relationship in, other than our main interest was in protecting our children. We weren't trying to be trailblazers in some kind of political sense. And so she said that, and it seemed like the hearing was going to end. And I just spoke up and spoke to my lawyer saying like, well, can we say something? If the judge is going to make a ruling against us, you want to have a voice.
Want to have a voice.
I want to say what I say, and I think I want the judge to hear what I have to say, even if she rules against us. I'm just going to sit here quietly and have the convenience of her not having to hear how it's impacting us in a human way. So they, I kind of spoke out of turn, and they decided she allowed us to make some statements, and they swore us in, and we made statements. And I think Ian has a transcript, so probably his book documents a little bit better what I said. But it was essentially me saying, I understand what you're saying, but there are real harms that could be suffered if we're not named the legal parents. If Ian's hit by a bus, if I'm hit by a bus, like our pensions end, health insurance in this country is tied to our jobs. We want to have obligations. So if the relationship falls apart, that we'd be, liable for having support orders and all those sorts of things. And in terms of inheritance, it's important, so that there's a lot of factors that are the things that protect children, and that by not doing this, that would be a harm to our children. So she, I spoke, Ian and Jeremy spoke some, and then ultimately she kind of thought about it and came back and said, well, I don't think I can find that your children will have been harmed, but when I'm reading the plain language of the statute in California regarding surrogacy and parentage, it says the intended parents shall be the legal parents, and it doesn't say number, it doesn't say gender. So ironic, in my sense, my thought, ironically, she kind of went back to sort of this plain textual reading of the language and then found for that. And so that was just great, because that really just seemed like it wasn't going to happen. And it was just kind of just heartbreaking and upsetting. And so it really felt like this huge victory that, regardless of how she the reasoning that she found, I really felt like us speaking and showing that we were people, and this was impacting real people. I do think that it changed her mind. So
absolutely. So she voted in your favor then.
Yeah,
obviously. And that had to be there's a good example of being courageous, having a voice, standing up and believing and showing that you really want to have children and that you have the best possible care available for these two beautiful kids. So let's talk a little bit about, with Parker, it was a little easier this time. After you had Piper, Parker comes along, and it was much easier. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the classic second child syndrome, where there's a lot of fuss over the first one, and the second one just kind of makes their way in the world that's already been established. And that sort of happened with the legal stuff. We had set this precedent that, a polyamorous family can have the birth certificate naming them as the legal parents of a child. And it really would have been strange for a court to then decide that our second child wouldn't get that privilege.
Of course, yeah.
So once that had happened, we didn't even need to go into court. Our lawyer took care of it like they do for a typical surrogacy case. And everything was just like simpler with Parker. We already had, the contracts and relationships set up. So we were familiar with that part of it as well. And there were fewer, health issues during his pregnancy as well. So that was smooth sailing.
Yeah. And I'll just add, I'm more of the neurotic warrior of the family. So I said, there's nothing that will make them have to find the same finding for our son Parker, because at that point the judge who had handled our case, she had retired, and so I just could go through someone else who might have a very different viewpoint and feel strongly about that. But it did go to another judge, and it, like Ian said, it really went without incident. So that was relieving to me after we should clarify for the listeners, I think we paid no less than like 8 lawyers in the process of like just having Piper alone.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So we were really keeping the local economy humming.
Yeah. Well, these kids, they'll grow up and they'll know that how much they were loved and cared about too. Well, let's talk a little bit about the kids. I want to learn. Piper now is 6 years old, right? And tell us a little bit about her. We'll have Jeremy tell us about her.
She is very precocious. She'll be 6 in like 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a force. She has this household wrapped around her little finger, and we're all just living in it. So, yeah, she's very funny. She is very headstrong. She knows who she is, and yeah, it's. Alan talks a lot about how not having a mom living in the house that, is putting the way that they were raised onto their child, that, he feels like she can really just flourish and be the person that she wants to be. And she definitely is. We don't put any constraints of, how we think a girl should be or anything like that on her that maybe we were raised with. So yeah, she's great.
Excellent. And let's talk about Parker a little bit. And Alan, I'm going to ask you about Parker. Tell us a little bit about Parker. He's more on the quiet side.
Yeah, he's 4. Jeremy's 6'5", so Piper is a giantess. She's like in the 99th percentile of like height and weight, and she's precocious and she's outspoken and she will talk to strangers, or she's not really shy. And Parker, came out and he's a little bit shy. He talked kind of late, well, a little bit after 2. And he is very just sweet temperamentally. He's a little bit sort of like a shy, sweet kid. His sister does a lot of talking for him. And he is a really good sharer. That was really notable to me. Like Piper will decide, I want the pink plate, you get the blue plate. And if Parker comes up and says, I want the pink plate, then Piper says, I want the pink plate, he'll just say, okay, well then I want the blue plate. He'll just immediately accommodate and act.
that may change as they get to be teenagers.
I hope it does. I hope it does for his sake. But right now, he's so agreeable. He very rarely has a tantrum or a fit. He just like is sweet and wants to be with you, and he's really sensitive. And he's pretty empathic. He knows when people are upset and wants to give them a hug. But he's just this really sweet-natured, kind of more quiet kid.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about the publicity of this book. I know that you guys received actually worldwide publicity on this book and this concept, 3 dads and a baby. Tell us a little bit about the publicity, and how do you think that would impact other people that may be in similar situations to this?
Well, publicity was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, not because we were trying to make a splash per se, or that we set out to make noise, but really because we recognize there are probably a lot of people that might benefit from hearing the story. One of the things that's in the book that isn't central to us being polyamorous, but is a great thing that grew out of it is, Jeremy's family is this conservative religious background, and so is Alan's to some extent because they're Catholic. But Jeremy's mother had a particularly difficult time accepting her son as gay, and then accepting that he was in a relationship with 2 other men. And she was amazing because she let us tell the story of how she came to grow and accept us into her family and recognize all the blessings that our union produced for us and for her as well, because everybody wants grandkids, right? And
of course.
It's the throuple that provided that. And so she grew to see that, and she let us tell that story. And I think that's so important for people to see. If you are struggling in a relationship where your parents don't understand you yet, or they're not accepting, that can change. If you're a parent that doesn't understand your gay son or your daughter or transgender or whatever is happening with you, you can see that, there is a path to understanding them and healing that relationship. And that's just kind of a side issue. There's polyamorous families that want to know how to protect their children the same way we did and need to know about that legal precedent. And there's just sort of practical things to learn about how to do surrogacy in a more cost-effective and less stressful way. So we felt all of these things really needed to be out there. And it was great to reach a large audience through things like, I guess there was Huffington Post, the BBC, the Daily News people, and I think the biggest one was
CNN. CNN was one, yeah.
And we were on morning shows in Australia and in the UK and podcasts all over Latin America and other radio shows in Europe and a bunch of other articles. So we ended up on like 5 continents, which I felt was pretty good.
Oh, outstanding. And it's getting your message out there too. Now, are all of your parents, Alan and Ian and Jeremy, do all of your parents accept, of course, they have grandchildren. Are they all accepting of it now? Your fathers and your mothers both? Or both of them? Is that true of you, Alan? Is that true of you, Ian?
My parents are on board and accepting and see my kids several times a year. And at this point, we've been with Jeremy for 10 years, and that's a lot longer than many marriages. So I think
is true.
Whatever people think about it, and we don't expect people to say like, of course, it's totally normal. It's an interesting, unusual relationship. So we're not surprised when people have questions, or if initially they have some reluctance, or sometimes people focus more on like somehow that it must be like an orgy or where are you sleeping? The people have a lot of initial questions on that, but once they sort of meet us and we're just like a regular family, we go to Costco, we take our kids to the park, we're deciding who's taking the kids to school and who's picking them up and how are they getting to the friend's birthday party, just like any other family. And I think, once you kind of get past the initial surprise, I feel like, at least maybe here, maybe we're in a bubble in San Diego, but we really haven't had really any significant pushback or blowback, or, at least nothing to our faces. So, I'd say that helps. And so at this point, it's like the grandparents are kind of got to be on board. They're used to it.
Ian, how about yours? How about your family?
Yeah, I've got a mother, father separated, so I have a stepmother as well, and they're all perfectly happy with things. I guess I remember when I came out to them, they said, we don't really understand it, but we love you. And within I guess a year, I had my partner at the time was just a full member of the family, and it's been completely normal. We haven't looked back from there. For us, that's been fantastic because, the kids benefit from having 3 perspectives, 3 parents, plus Megan visits often and is part of their life as well. So they really have kind of like 3 parents plus Megan is a lot. Plus they've got 7 grandparents that love them, which is huge. I just, for bad luck and some medical issues, only really met one of my grandparents. Didn't get to know her very well at all. So they have more than 7 times as much grandparent attention as I did. And I think that's fantastic because there's more perspectives, there's more learning. All of them bring something different to the development of the kids. And it's just a lot easier to make a wonderful experience for children when you have a lot of help.
Excellent. That's true. So I'm going to ask you each a question here. And we'll start with Ian first. What's it like being a parent now? Are you glad and happy for what you did?
Oh, absolutely. I think the thing about parenting for me is it's like the highs are high, sometimes the lows are lower, but I have had lots of wonderful experiences in my life, and there's really nothing as exhilarating and joyful as something like the first laughter of your baby. Or just something truly touching they do now that they're older and they have their personalities and they do something sweet. It's a fantastic experience, and well worth the sometimes the tears or the stress that we had, for sure.
How about you, Alan, as a parent?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely worth it. I'm a parent later in life than I expected, but on the other hand, that I feel like has made me more mature and more financially ready and more solid in my decision to do it. And I feel like in a lot of ways, sometimes it feels like we're cheating because there's 3 of us. So people that we know who have, are in a straight relationship with children, sometimes I can, after they know us, I can see sort of that, they'll make comments like, I wish I had a third or another set of hands. how nice it is and practical in some ways, as strange as it all might seem on the surface. Like it's really actually really practical in terms of raising children. I think a lot of society has moved away from like, it takes a village to raise a child. And we've got being a parent has made me so empathic for single parents. I mean, it's such a struggle to raise a child in so many ways, and me having more support that help my kids is incredible. And I'd say it's also given me even more tremendous empathy for women and gratitude for women in terms of, it just forces you to look through your eyes from a slightly different lens. And I thought, as a gay man, I'm a feminist and I've got this viewpoint that's different than a straight man. And so I can empathize. And I think like being a parent has just, and especially a parent of a girl, has just amped that up even more. And I think about all the time, like, but for the kindness of women, we couldn't even have the children that we have. So I think all the time my mind's blown of what a time to be alive, where we can have kids through scientific help, and I have like the largesse of women to come and help us who want to do it, and are cheerleaders and are backing us at every stage, that have really made our kids possible. So it has made me incredibly grateful to all out there.
Thank you very much. And Jeremy, how about you? I know you always wanted children.
Yeah, I love being a parent. Our kids make us laugh every day. And there's a catharsis in being able to raise kids where they can be anything they want to be or do anything they want to do in life. I think that for a gay man that was raised in a really religious background, that can be really healing. And I also kind of think of kids as an IRA account where, you're putting into them and hoping that they'll give something out to you at the other end of life. So,
yes, I got you. I got that as well. Well, I want to just thank you all for being on my podcast today. This is an incredible story. I have one other question, and probably none of you dads will probably be able to answer it. Who's going to walk Piper down the aisle when she gets married?
All of us, for sure.
Okay.
What's so funny is Piper just asked me about this like 2 days ago. She said, well, do I only get to have one person walk me down the aisle? And then would it be you? Because you're daddy, and that's the closest to dad, and dads walk down the aisle. And I was like, Piper, you can have anyone you want walk you down the aisle. And she said, okay, I'm going to have all three of you then. So we actually literally just talked about this because of her seeing things do that. And mice get married in the movie Zootopia. So she had a lot of questions.
Excellent. That's great. Well, you guys, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said it'll be like a relay race situation.
Well, that's great. Well, thank all of you for being on my podcast. This is such a powerful story. And for my podcast listeners, again, the book is called Three Dads and a Baby. Ian Jenkins wrote it, MD. You can get it on Goodreads, and you can also get it on Amazon. And I'm enjoying the heck out of it. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And thank all three of you for being on my podcast. I'm looking forward to meeting you guys. Of course, I spend the summers in San Diego and La Jolla, and I'm looking forward to meeting you guys in the near future. And thanks again for being on my podcast.
Thanks, Dan. Great meeting you.